But I think ultimately and always, I have this sort of people-centric and people-first philosophy about the things that hit my radar. So that is certainly front and center on my mind, mostly as it relates to AI. There is tremendous value in picking up a telephone. There's tremendous value in going over to somebody's apartment and knocking on the door. There is tremendous value in figuring out how you can physically engage with somebody.
Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to this episode of Multifamily Mind. My name is Steve Wunch, and I'm your host. Pleased to be this morning with our guest speaker, Mike Brewer. Many of you know Mike. He's been a pretty powerful voice in the multifamily space for quite some time. Mike is passionate about people, technology, and real estate. Mike's investment in technological advances and education improves the team member experience and elevates customer engagement. He most recently serves as the chief operating officer of the Radco Companies, which is an Atlanta-based real estate investment firm. Mike has received numerous industry honors, including 7, count that 7, Property Management Company of the Year awards under his leadership. He frequently contributes to industry-related media. His vlog, The Multifamily Collective, reaches industry professionals across the globe who tune in daily for Mike's reflections on everything from consumer trends to employee relations, professional growth, and beyond. An avid reader, as you can see from the bookcases behind him, and a lifelong learner, Mike has been teasing our human potential in multifamily space for more than 29 years. Let's welcome him to the show, Mike Brewer. So glad to have you here this morning.
Steve, thank you. Such an honor. It's really wild listening to your bio, your own bio. It's odd, but thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me to the show, Steve.
You bet. It's nice to have you. I get excited when I get folks like you because, you know, in the preliminary conversations that we have with potential guests, we always ask, well, what's on your mind? What do you want to talk about? And you gave free reign to topics. So, one of the things that we're doing with Multifamily Mind is we really want to position it as like a thought leadership environment so that folks that are listening get to hear from folks that maybe they won't, rub elbows with in real life, people maybe that they've followed for a long time and really want to hear, right straight from the horse's mouth, what's on their mind. So I know you've had a couple of things going on in your world lately, and just wondered what's kind of bubbling up on your radar this morning in terms of multifamily and what you're focusing on.
It's I'm that sort of generalist in terms of kind of things that are hitting my radar as of late. I certainly all the buzzwords that are going on in the industry, centralization, artificial intelligence. But I think ultimately and always, I have this sort of people-centric and people-first philosophy about the things that hit my radar. So that is certainly front and center on my mind, mostly as it relates to AI and how I think AI might impact our employee base across this industry, not just multifamily, but across industries in the world. So that's it for right now.
Well, that's a great topic of conversation because I know we've talked about it quite a bit at my company, and how do we leverage that tool without losing, our responsibility as humans to make sure that whatever messages are going out or whatever processes are being improved take into consideration that kind of human factor. I know a lot of folks in the multifamily space get a little nervous when it comes to centralization, conversations around how AI is, what's the word I'm looking for? It is automating a lot of processes that are in place, technology in general, not just AI. But what are you most afraid of in terms of what AI might potentially do? And what are you most excited about potentially that AI might do?
Yeah, those are great questions. If I started with what am I most afraid of, I think the most utopian version of AI is that it really takes over everything and sort of creates this Wall-E world. If you've seen
Terminator,
Wall-E, or Terminator, that's the other part. Worst parts of the Bible, that kind of thing. But I think what I really am, but I think all of that stuff is way out there in the distance. I think what I am most excited about, I said this in the context of many years ago, Bill Gates had a vision and a mission to put a PC, and these PCs weren't his, but a PC on every desk in the world, because he wanted his operating system to be on all of those PCs.
Right.
I've been on a mission for, who knows, let's call it a decade or a little more, to take all of those PCs off of the desks in every office across the multifamily industry, because it gives time back. It takes away the distraction. It allows you and I to have an eye-to-eye conversation. And I think AI, to answer the question, is what I'm most excited about, is that AI gives us the opportunity to disappear a lot of those rote and routine tasks that keep people nested in their offices or behind their computers. So that's very exciting, to give time back to our team members so they can invest that in creating relationships instead of transactions.
I love it. I love it. And, I speak that language all the time. Whatever they do, no matter how minute it might seem to them as a transaction, no way. Everything they do has an impact on the relationships with the residents, with their teams. So I love that concept of, kind of I was even watching on the Today Show this morning. They were talking about, it's not just teens who need to think about disconnecting from devices and social media, but the entire family needs to think about it, because whether you believe it or not, whether you want to accept it or not, when you're locked onto a device, whether it's a crutch and you're using it to avoid maybe a resident conflict, and you stay behind that screen because it kind of is protective, or just a habit that needs to be broken. That art of disconnecting is so important. What are some recommendations that you'd make, thinking about folks that are working at the properties, our property managers, our service managers and service teams, our leasing folks, other than, if they've got a device that allows them to be mobile with it, to get up and away from their desks, and maybe some best practices that you've seen implemented in your experience in that regard.
Yeah. So one of my favorites, and logistically speaking, I don't know if this is possible in every single office, but I think it is. If you're having a conversation, whether it be with a team member or a resident or anyone for that matter, get up from your desk, walk out into a common area, sit around on a couch or around a table where there are no devices, and leave your phone in the office when you get up to have that conversation. So I think if you just make a practice out of stopping what you're doing, being mindful of the fact that you're about to have a conversation, and then pick that conversation up physically and move it to a different space where you don't have distractions, that's first and foremost. I think the second is understand and know that most supervision, that is who you work for, those people understand that you're in a forward-facing, customer service, relationship-oriented business. And if you don't need to answer every single email that comes into your inbox the second it comes into your inbox, because a lot of us do that, right? We just think, oh, good, speed to response is going to get me promoted, or it's going to get me this, or it's going to get me that. No, it's not. Serving the customer is really where the big bang for the buck is, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I love that concept, and I've taught it for, almost 30 years, in that, we built a nice, big, pretty clubhouse for you to use as a tool. It's not just a show place. It's a sales floor and a place to have conversations. When you go to the car dealership, you're right there with a vehicle, or sometimes you're in the vehicle, the conversation. So I love the idea of, taking those conversations away from your desk. Now, if you're like me and you have CRA syndrome, which I define as can't remember anything syndrome, what do you recommend folks do? Because, we're tethered to that computer, and a lot of times folks are, multitasking. They're entering notes into the CRM while they're interacting with somebody. Is there an old school technique that you have up your sleeve to take note on what we're hearing from folks that we're conversing with?
Yeah, you know what? I love that you tee that up for me. I am a big believer in, look, I have a pencil in my hand right now, and I have a notepad right in front of me, and call it old school, call it inefficient, in the sense that, yep, there it is. there is real science out there that would tell you when you take a pen and you put it to paper and you record something, it imbues on your mind much more quickly and much more effectively than it does with typing.
Yeah.
And so it may add a step, right? But because you've taken that note, because it's imbued on your mind, because you now might go back to the computer and enter that into your CRM system, you've done a couple of reps with that information. And so kind of put it in this context, if that resident or that person comes back to you at a later date, my imagination tells me that because you've done those exercises, you might just remember or recall that information pretty quickly versus having to go and look in the system to find it. Not every time, but that act of actually writing something is important.
It is. It's actually it's a part of adult learning theory, is that you write things down and it does inscribe it more deeply into your short-term and long-term memory. I keep notes. I can't tell you how many. I'm looking at them now. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notepads up here on my shelf that are full of notes. I rarely go back and look at them again, but because I've taken that note, I've either accomplished a task or I've addressed the issue, and I know that it's there in case I need to fall back on it, which is great. So yeah, it might add one extra step into the equation, but I think it's important because people feel more comfortable. It's, when you're sitting across the desk from someone having a conversation, it feels kind of interrogative and almost like you're in trouble when you're across the desk and I'm on this side of the desk. I sit in the position of power,
Right.
It kind of levels the playing field and makes people feel at ease. One thing I always do, Mike, and I don't know if this is something that you do as well, is especially if I'm with a customer or a resident, I always ask permission. Do you mind if I take some notes while we talk? Because I don't want to forget anything that's important to you.
Yeah, I think that's a great tactic. And it's just that plants a sense of confidence in a consumer's mind and a sense of trust in a consumer's mind that you think it's important enough first to ask that permission, but second to record that information. That just, if you're setting a relationship, it's a good trust building tactic. I love that.
It's old. I've been saying it for the last few years. The old school is the new school. There are so many practices out there that we've done for 30 years, and I tell you, there's some value into resurrecting some of those ideas and processes. You mentioned the concept of trust and the consumer trusting the product or the service or whatever that looks like. For us, trust is huge because, of course, we're dealing with one of the most important decisions that somebody makes, and that's the decision to call a place home. In terms of AI in this new normal that we're moving towards, how do you suggest that folks, because I'll leverage AI, I'll leverage it to help me write a blog post, and I'll feed it. I feed it a lot of good information up front, but people who know me really well probably could tell that I had some help with that. And I think a lot of times when we're automating review responses and we're centralizing that concept of having a limited number of people who can actually respond to online reviews, whether they be good or whether they be not so good. But consumers can tell when it's a template or when it's not human. Would you agree?
Oh yeah. Yes.
So if you were leading a team at a property, what suggestions would you make to ensure that element of human touch doesn't go away and that those responses, even though they may be automated, are, feel a little bit more human?
Yeah, I think so. Probably my gut tells me that even though you have AI assist you in some way, even though it is a co-pilot to you, you're looking at that information before you actually send it out and you're editing it. I believe that even if there are pieces of it that you don't edit, you're still putting your authentic touch or your voice into the narrative. And so if I'm leading a team on site, I would say there's still, go back to the old, there is tremendous value in picking up a telephone. There is tremendous value in going over to somebody's apartment and knocking on the door. There is tremendous value in figuring out how you can physically engage with somebody. Now, if you're doing an online thing in the way of reviews, I still think you've got to put your eyes on whatever response an AI agent or a bot might give back to a consumer. You still have to put your eyes on that. And if you're not doing every single one, at least make it a weekly practice to review everything that's gone back and forth between a consumer and a bot and get some lessons out of that, or see where the bot might be missing the mark, so that you go back and sort of retrain the model, so to speak, or retrain the bot to act more personal. Now, I will say, this is scary. I've been reading a lot of books on AI and GAI and different facets of machine learning. It's getting better and better and better every day. And there, in the not too distant future, it'll sound just like Steve, whether Steve wrote it or not, or said it or not. It's getting that good, and it'll be that good.
And it's frightening, but it could even look like me and sound like me. We've heard about all these stories around deep fakes, and I see them all the time. I can't tell you how many times I get sucked into, oh, look, it's Kelly Clarkson, and she's talking about this weight loss gummy, and it's not even her. It's her voice.
That's right.
I mean, you can tell her mouth moves funny, but if you're not paying attention and you're not really focused on some of those really important details, you could easily get duped. And that is a bit concerning, right?
That's right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just I didn't mean to cut you off there. One of the things that is going to be a sort of a, let's call it an aha moment for us, is the moment you or I or any team member in the multifamily industry gets caught with our pants down, so to speak. In other words, you've had this exchange with something that seems very real. As a consumer, I have this exchange with something that seems very real. And then I walk in an office and I start to have a conversation with you thinking that you already know what we talked about, and you don't. And you're put on the spot.
Yeah.
You're not going to like that. I wouldn't like that. I'm sure you wouldn't like it. And I'm sure team members are not going to like it. But that is the moment that tells you that, hey, look, you can't set it and forget it. You have to be engaged in these conversations in some way, shape, or form, so that that moment doesn't happen to you.
Yeah. It actually happened to me, Mike, when I made the move from Denver to Richmond. I was online apartment searching, and I had these really great interactions with a leasing consultant named Scout. And when I got to the property, I was like, where's Scout? I want to talk to Scout, because they were great. They answered all my, and the guy was like, well, Scout's our bot. And I was like, oh my gosh, you're kidding. I felt like I felt like a total nerd. Like, tell the difference. But I also brought up the point that Scout was great up to a point, and then Scout stopped responding. And that's the key, because like we've got guidelines and metrics around internet response times, 2 hours or less. You want to beat the competition to punch. The bot takes over and kind of even gives you a 48-hour, a lot of times it's a 48-hour buffer window between when the bot engages the customer and when the bot finally turns the customer over to the leasing team. But I think you, like, to your point, don't just set it and forget it. Make sure you're checking regularly, because in the world of technology, and you know this better than I do, Mike, one little snag somewhere in the programming or the coding breaks this piece here, and then it breaks 72 other pieces everywhere else, right? So you've got to be engaged. You've got to pay attention, and you've got to make sure that, like, there should have been a handoff from Scout to the actual person in the office, right? Like, let me introduce you to so-and-so, who's the leasing consultant on property, who will be meeting you for your tour, right?
That's right. For all the good in technology, there still is, I don't necessarily like this word, but there still is friction in the process. And it's not, there are not these smooth handoffs that happen as they should, and they will. At some point, that'll be built into the system. But today you just have to be mindful and aware that it's not perfect, and it does make sense to go back and audit it frequently. Yeah.
I'd even turn mindful up to diligent, because like I'm doing some conference outreach and trying to set appointments with people, and something happened with Zoom a couple of days ago, and my scheduler went berserk, and it just my event disappeared, and all of my guests got a cancellation email. I mean, and I don't know what happened. Probably it was me, but I'm going to assume it was Zoom because I really didn't do anything to change the dates of the event. So to your point, you can't just sit back on your laurels and expect the technology to run without hitch, because there will be friction, and we need to be mindful of where does that happen. And we need to provide those supplier partners with feedback regarding the process. And even on-site managers, don't wait for your regional team to be the message bearer. Reach out to your reps and let them know, because sometimes your RMs they're taking care of 10 properties and 17 other fires that are a lot more important in their perspective, which is fully appreciated. So, take it upon yourself. If something doesn't look or feel or sound right, don't just settle for it, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Hi, folks. I wanted to take a quick 30-second break so that I could say, I hope you're enjoying today's episode, which couldn't be brought to you without being superpowered by Sales Mail. I mean, really, we couldn't produce this content without them. Sales Mail is the easiest and best tool for sending personalized video via email, text, and CRM. So, if you really are enjoying today's episode, it would mean a lot to me if you would visit salesmail.com so you can check out how our solutions might impact your business communications. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn as well. Okay, that's enough. Now back to the conversation.
The pace of change has accelerated. Even every year it accelerates at an even faster clip, right? So what is true today and what is accurate today and what is seamless and flawless today is broken tomorrow. So you just gotta be all over it all the time.
Or it's maybe not broken, but it's updated. There's enhancements and updates happen all the time, and you have to watch those. So I know you're kind of in between gigs right now, but like if you were still in that chair, leading an organization, a multifamily company, we did a lot of technology implementation pre and during COVID, just so that we could manage through that experience. Were there things that you guys implemented in your past experiences that you think, maybe looking back now, either they're not relevant for today's situation, or maybe they're not even needed any longer? Anything like that on your radar these days?
I guess I would answer this question. I'd answer it in this way, which may not answer your question specifically. We had a practice in, I think, every organization that I worked in, save the first couple of organizations. But anytime we looked at technology, we always tried to put pure definition to the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Because many times you could potentially run down a path of trying to solve a problem, and you get halfway down the path and you realize that you're solving something that wasn't really the problem in the first place. So pure definition. Then we would put together a business case for why we wanted to implement a piece of technology, which included this very long checklist of reasons why or reasons why not, to include communication plans and change management methodologies and calendars for timelines and events and things. So it's very comprehensive. And it also included hey, if we're going to put this piece of technology in place, what one or two other pieces of technology can you take out of the system, right? Because many times you just get technology creep, and then all of a sudden you've got 60 logins, 20 of which make no difference anymore, right?
Yeah, right.
So I think what I would say in answering this question is make sure you have a really good business case methodology for proving out why you need a piece of technology. The other thing it includes that I think is very important is there many of your providers, to the point that we just made, they're iterating all of the time. They're updating all of the time. They're enhancing and innovating on their technologies. And many times they're putting solutions in place that you're not even aware of. And It's not necessarily the fault of the salesperson. It's just the salesperson is moving 1,000 miles an hour in terms of selling the product. They don't necessarily see all these enhancements are coming along, or they just don't get them in their head. So it's incumbent upon the person who's using technology to make sure that your current provider doesn't already have solutions for what you're trying to solve. So that would be my main punchline is get a process.
Get a process. And, I actually kind of, while you were speaking, I was actually thinking in the physical realm, you wouldn't hire two, if you didn't have the payroll for it, you wouldn't hire two to do the exact same job for the exact same position. So why would you hire two different vendors who can do the same thing? It makes total sense. You want to look at both of them and see which one, does my current give me what I need, and will it be there for me in the future? Because, sometimes that happens where they're not prepared for growth. Technology goes way off very quickly and they're kind of left behind. Or, are they overpromising what the future will look like? I mean, it's an interesting concept to consider, but I love the idea of really just kind of looking through things on a regular basis. And especially those, I think the frontline managers at the properties, they're the boots on the ground that are using things. Did you ever have focus groups where you actually spoke to those folks on site, or did those decisions only come down from upon high?
Yeah. So I'll answer that question both ways. In the early innings, it's I'm a speed to market kind of person. So, and I'm a ship it. I got to be careful about ship P at the end and iterate kind of guy. So there were a lot of times in the early innings that I would just put things in place without bringing a committee together or a focus group together. But later on, I realized that is really important. And you make sure you get the end user on board. You get the people who I ended up calling them influencers or sneezers within the organization. Sneezers are kind of people who spread viruses. And I know that has a negative connotation. But you really do. Champions, power users. It used to work in the pandemic. It doesn't work so much, but, and I would really encourage every one of your watchers or listeners to not underestimate the power of a good roadshow. What I mean by that is get out of your office, go out to your end user's office, sit down next to them at their leasing desk, at their assistant manager's desk, at the property manager's desk, and watch them. Or sit in their chair and have them walk you through what they're having to do on a daily basis so that you have that holistic picture in your mind when you're trying to look at new technologies. Roadshows are awesome. I love them.
Yeah, I love them. When I was at Capital Square Living, we actually did a roadshow to introduce the leadership team to the folks in the field. But we also, we really wanted to create this kind of employee-centric environment where people were valued, their opinions mattered, and we wanted people to feel comfortable asking about anything. And we said that, and we really put it to work. And I can't tell you how many times we would transition a property and we had a plan in place with our tech stacks already. Here we go. And then we'd get feedback. Hey, this piece of the puzzle just does not work for us. What we had before was better. And we're really feeling like this is a struggle now. And we took that and we actually backtracked and re-implemented things that were already in place that were better tools based on that employee feedback. And that accomplished two things. Number one, it took that friction out of their day-to-day process. And number two, it demonstrated that we walk the talk and we really do want to hear that feedback. And so for those listening that are in the trenches on site, don't just settle for things that aren't, if you've got a thorn in your flesh, please somehow raise the flag and at least have a conversation, right? And then I loved your point about, getting out in the field. If you're from the corporate support team, I think no matter what role you're in, I can't tell you how many organizations I work with where there's a problem with accounting and the property and they just don't like one another. It happens all the time.
That's right.
If an accountant knew what a day was like for a property manager, especially at some of the properties that are the tough ones to manage, they might have a different perception of why they're not getting a response like they think they should, or X, Y, and Z, and there's such value. I call it management by walking around. I love that concept. And it's more than just like go into the office and sit with the manager. Would you agree? I mean, I think everybody on the team needs to have a seat at that particular table. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think even if that seat at the table is sort of metaphorical in nature, but backed by good data, I think I'll just give you an example of from Radco. Each Monday morning, we had a senior team meeting, and we were intentional about bringing the voice of the consumer and the voice of the team member to the table. And the voice of the consumer came through our resident sentiment surveys, right? So everybody who was sitting at that table needed to show up having read all of the comments from the prior 7 days. Same for our team member sentiment, right? They had to show up at the table having read all the narrative from our team members for the trailing 7 days. And that in our heads, right, that's having the team member seat, a voice heard at the table, and also for the consumer. But I think it's critical. I think the sort of the converse of that, and not necessarily in the format of a meeting, having even the CEO, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your title, to your point. You need to go out and spend a day in the life of, and you need to get out of the corporate office. And so many times people nest, or these days they nest at home, right? And they don't get out in the world. You have to get out in the world. You have to visit team members on site, be in person, and understand what they're going through on a daily basis. It's the only way you can make good informed decisions about what you're doing in your organization.
Yeah. I've had some conversations with Gary Gregory, whom I know you know, and I had some conversations with Jen Picotti, whom I know you know. Jen's got the data that backs up what's causing employee disengagement. And Gary's an expert at these languages of appreciation in the workplace. And quality time is one of the most desired ways to put gas back in somebody's tank, to fill their bucket back up. And quality time isn't just a quick 5-minute, sit and spin and walk the property and then off to your next. It's actually quality time, which means we listen, we take note, we ask for feedback, we have good conversations about performance. And so I love hearing that you required that from your folks to really have them show up to the table at those corporate level meetings with a full understanding of here's what's happening from the customer's perspective and here's what's happening from the team member perspective. And I know the team member experience has a direct impact on the customer experience. So you've got to know what's going on, and you've got to be willing to listen and maybe hear some things you don't want to hear,
So true. And I know, from years and years of training in this industry, it's, there's kind of this philosophy, which is really a truth as far as I'm concerned. If you don't want to know, you shouldn't ask. But if you do ask, right, to the point of this, if you do ask and you get the feedback and you don't like it, you still have to be ready to take action on it. To the extent that it is absolutely reasonable to do something with information that you get from a team member, even from a consumer, you need to act on it. You need to communicate it. You need to shout it from the rooftops that you're actually hearing people and you're doing something to implement change in the organization. It goes so far when you do it within the eyes of an employee and to your organization at large.
Yeah. And I mean, I know you're good at this in terms of really showing up with intention and being present and listening to hear versus listening to respond. Did you have any kind of did you sort of set the bar for your team? Like, say you had regional reporting up to you. Did you kind of set the bar for what your expectations were when they were on site and what you wanted them to expose themselves and involve themselves in when they were making those site visits?
Yes, this is such a great question. And I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version to this, but
you don't have to cut it short.
I truly believe that you have to demonstrate physically and say what you mean right out loud to people, because people can't read your mind. And let's use site visit as an example. I have this saying: digital curb to commode. And digital curb means your web presence in every workflow that goes through that web presence to attract a prospect and to work them through to a resident. So that's digital appeal. But then the commode is that literally that piece of caulking that goes around the base of the toilet, right? There is craftsmanship in that, believe that, or right along the base of the bathtub. There is craftsmanship in that. And so everything from that sort of start in digital presence through to that commode is a buying signal in a consumer's mind, right? They may not even say these things out loud. They may not even realize them as they're thinking them. But if anything is clunky in that workflow, they'll imbue it here, and it becomes part of the calculus that they use to make a decision to buy from you or not, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So to your question, my expectation was always set by going out to a property physically with a regional manager and literally walking through, sitting down in front of the laptop, walking through the entire thing in front of the property manager, and then literally physically walking the property. And by the time I left the property, my hands were either like chalk black dirty because I seriously feel everything from the fire extinguisher boxes to the handrails going up or down staircases to every appliance. I would pull drawers out of stoves and so on and so forth. So this is where I'll kind of bring it to an end. But by doing so, that regional manager knew my expectation as it related to the quality of that workflow because they saw it. They were asked questions. They were able to ask questions back. We were able to talk about reasonability and all of that. But they didn't have any question marks by the time we left that experience of what it should be.
Love it. How did then that message get to the folks that are actually boots on the ground doing the work?
All of them. So when we do a site visit, it's everybody, right?
Okay.
You don't leave people out of that equation. And many times I hear these complaints that maintenance technicians or leasing consultants, it's like the regional manager and the whoever is above them show up, they close the door at the property manager's office, and no one's involved in things. Oh no, we do group tours, right? We all go together. We talk about everything from landscaping to, unit presentation, the whole thing. Everybody talks in one group. So there is no confusion about what it should look like.
I love it. That's amazing. I parlayed to the hospitality arena for a little while back in the day. And I remember thinking when it came to crafting training for housekeeping, I mean, you think, well, how hard can it be? Make the bed, empty the trash, fold the towels. But I was like, no, you need to go in a room and you need to do everything that a customer is going to do. Go in the bathroom and sit on the toilet and close the door and look at all the hair that's plastered on the back of that door and tell me that it's a room that's clean and it's ready to be rented.
Right.
So that's a great reminder of a real old school technique in terms of, I love the group tour. Let's all go through. Let's all set the expectations together. If there's any question at that point in time, you can address it, nip it in the bud, and really have everybody be on the same page, which I think is so important.
That's right. And I guess this probably goes without saying, but that is not a one-time event, right? You don't get to show up and once people, move in and out of this business all of the time. Regional managers are consistently moving in and out of this business or moving on to other organizations. So you have to constantly reset that expectation on an ongoing basis.
It is a roadshow, and roadshows, look at Cher. She's on the final tour, part 17, right? She's not.
She looks all of 29 years old. I don't get it.
I know. She figured out how to turn back time. But I love that idea, and I think too part of what plays into why there is turnover is because people aren't clear on what the expectation is. They're performing to the best of their abilities based on what they think is the expectation, and when that doesn't, match up with what the ivory tower is looking for, it can create that friction again, and that can also create a negative employee experience. So if you do it right up front, it's that whole old adage, do it right up front, do it the first time, take your time, right. Do it well, do it slow, ask the right questions, set the right expectations. You'll have a lot less trouble on the back end dealing with trying to redo it, right?
That's right. And I think, I don't know why this point comes to mind, but I think a lot of times in those moments, there is fear of confrontation or fear of looking stupid by asking questions. And I think it is incumbent upon leaders, whether you're in the regional role, property management role, any role, if you body language tells you a lot. So if you're looking at someone and you're explaining something and they have a very quizzical look on their face and you ask them if they have a question and they say no, you say, great. Can you just feed back to me what we just talked about, right? Tell me in your own words what we just examined here, and have them tell you, right? Because many times the no is that, look, I don't want to be put on stage right now. I'm a little bit afraid, or I don't want to ask. We got to get over that. And the only way to get over that is to be forced into getting over it. And sometimes being forced, and it gracefully, obviously, we don't want to rob dignity, but kind of forcing people into that extra step of explaining what you just said to them so that you know that it got across, or that they know that they know that they know that you got it. So,
I love that. And even prior to that, as a leader within an organization, really creating that space where it's safe to say, I don't know. Debbie Phillips and I were just talking about that idea of psychological safety. And, that's right. People's mental well-being is high on the radar these days. And there's nothing that contributes to the demise of their well-being when they don't feel safe, or they don't feel like it's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not feeling okay about this, or whatever that might be. So, from the leader on down, that has to really be the condition, right?
You bring up an important point there, and there's a gentleman named Bob Chapman. He wrote a book called Everyone Matters, or Everybody Matters. And he describes it like this, to your point. The most important, or the relationship that you have with your supervisor, is more important than the relationship you have with your doctor. And it is because that person who governs you, who leads you, has the ability to inflict psychological pain on you or trigger you in some way, shape, or form. So it's incredibly important as leaders that you create that safe space that you just talked about. You have to know that you impact that person that you're leading, and it is an absolute privilege that you're getting to lead them. So you need to do it well, because you can impact them in very negative ways.
I love that. And I'm going to take your doctor analogy one step further. And as you know, in today's world, you manage your own health.
That's right. That's so true.
Seriously. And if you don't, like, I had an issue with something, and I know how my body works. My doctor wanted to go one direction, so I went that direction for a while, and it wasn't working. And I said, look, doctor, I know my body, and this is what works for me. And I had to speak up and say, if I know this works, give me this, and I'll report back what happens. And it worked. And I think in the same context with your career, your current role, the role that you want to be in, you own your own health in that respect. Right. So, I know it sometimes is difficult to be the first one to raise your hand, or if you're in an environment where it maybe doesn't feel like it's okay to question or to ask or to need help with something. Maybe it's time to get a new doctor.
Absolutely fair.
Yep. Well, this has been an awesome conversation. I always love when we get on this talk and don't really know the direction that we're going, especially with those in the business that I consider to be oracles that can talk about anything. So I love, we always walk away from conversation with one another, Mike, I've learned some things today. I hope you have as well. And I know our listeners will really appreciate your approach. One of the things that we do here at the Multifamily Mind is we ask each of our guests one specific question, and we use the word audacious. And we define audacious as extremely brave, daring, reckless, fearless, kind of like that audacious explorer who's going to, spelunk that cave, no matter how dangerous it might be, because it needs to be done, or there's gold down there, or whatever the case might be. So you've had some audacious takes already, I think, in our conversation, but what, to end things, wrap things up, put a nice bow on it, what is your most audacious take on multifamily at the moment?
I guess my most audacious take would be that I truly believe and I can say this because I'm an older guy now. I believe the youth in this multifamily space, you've run into this dynamic where Gen Z is serving Gen Z. So Gen Z is in the workplace. They are also the consumer of the product that we are selling. And I do believe that dynamic is going to accelerate the pace of change in the multifamily space, such that we get back. Gen Z really cares about the social world, right? Yes, they just care very, very deeply about that. And I think that's going to accelerate the pace of the change that is going to impact multifamily and get us back to that point where we are conducting relationship-oriented business versus this transaction-oriented business, because Gen Z is also very adept at technology. And what they experience out here in the world with the Amazons and the Apples and the Netflix, they will want in this experience in multifamily. Yes. And they are going to make that change happen very rapidly. I'm very excited about it, to the point that I think those computers will finally disappear from the desks of every property manager and assistant and leasing consultant. It can happen. People go, what? How can you do it without a device? You can do it. It'll happen. I promise. And these people, these young, youthful parts of our generation in the multifamily space will make it happen.
And they have so much value to bring to the conversation because of their experience. That's awesome. Love it. That actually sounds like a great topic for a future episode.
I'm in.
All right. This has been a great conversation, Mike. Again, thank you so much for your time. For those of you listening, thanks so much for joining us. This is Steve Wunch on the Multifamily Mind, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Cheers. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Multifamily Mind podcast, brought to you by Sales Mail, the easiest way to send personalized video via email, text, and CRM. To learn more, go to salesmail.com. And remember, always be audacious. Until next time, I'm Steve Wunch. Have a great week.